Welcome to the Embodiment Matters podcast with me, Erin Giesemann-Rabke, and my husband, Carl Rabke. Embodiment Matters is an ongoing, rich conversation about what it really means to be embodied and why and how embodiment matters so much in our daily lives and in our modern world. In our conversations, we explore a wide range of topics around waking up and being embodied, and we offer guided practices to help you return to your embodiment as a source of wisdom, guidance, and intimacy with life. To access more resources, to join our email list, or to find out about becoming a supporter of this podcast, visit bodyhappy.com. Hi friends, it's Erin here, and I'm so excited to share with you this super enlivening conversation I had with my friend Karen Wallace. I met Karen when we were both doing an embodied life training over 3 years, and I just loved her energy, loved her writing. She would occasionally share some of the poems she was writing that are now collected in a beautiful book called There Is No Need to Talk About This, Poetic Inquiry from the Art Therapy Studio. Karen lives in Regina in Saskatchewan, and she is a therapist and a teacher. She's an art therapist, an artist, a focusing trainer, an art instructor. She does private practice with adults and children, specializing in depression and trauma and life transition. She facilitates art therapy, creativity, and art groups. She teaches internationally, and she's trained, oh my gosh, her her embodied healing toolkit is really huge. Sand tray, art making, focusing, narrative therapy, feminist therapy, journal and creative writing, movement, somatic experiencing, stress reduction techniques, EMDR, meditation techniques, and play therapy. She's fantastic. And this conversation was so great for me personally. I don't really identify as an artist. I have certain ways I get creative, but I was super inspired by this conversation personally in talking with Karen. So I hope you enjoy our conversation. And we'll list on the website and in the blog post ways you can find her and also her fantastic book. Thanks so much for listening. Enjoy. Hi, Karen, and welcome to our podcast.
Hi, Erin, and thanks for inviting me.
I'm so happy to have you here. So I gave you the heads up that we would start with this question, and I'm so curious what you might have to say about just what does it mean to be embodied?
Okay, when I think about being embodied, I think about it as a creative kind of endeavor and a creative process of how I can entice or call home or make safe the space for the children and the teenagers and the adults that I work with who have experienced high-end trauma to come back to their bodies. Mm-hmm. So is there, because embodiment is important, but because of what they've experienced, they've had the experience of being pushed out or dislodged or shocked out of embodiment. Right. And the body is no longer a safe place. Mm-hmm. So how can I, as a facilitator in their life using art therapy, recreate that home or that body so that they can experience the joys of being embodied again?
Mm-hmm. That's so much richness in what you just said right there. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the connection between art therapy and creativity and just what you're talking about, or how you make a space for them to come back to being embodied.
Okay, so through play and art, through the act of creativity, and let's just start with the 4 senses. So sight, sound, taste, touch. If you can, let's say a child comes here and they're they're living outside of their body, that they're living in pretty high-end trauma. Everything it escalates them. They live in fight or flight. And they get engaged with sand tray. They fall in love with working in the water tray and feeling the feel of water on their hands, or they love the smell of clay, or they love the images they're making on paper. So if they can have kind of visitations, short periods that they can actually rest back in that body that they thought was a painful place to live because of the trauma they experienced, if their senses can bring them back so that they can be home in a different way through that sensate experience, then that's the joy of art therapy. That's kind of the gift of art therapy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, a way of coming back to the alive self through a different avenue, right? Through a different kind of door.
So it's almost like you're not trying to be embodied. It's what happens through creative process. Yeah, because the children I work with no longer trust their body. Mm-hmm. So how can they come back in a different way through the imagination, through art, through creative process, that they can experience themselves in the life force safely? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's beautiful. Is there a way that they understand that that's happening? Like, do you make that concrete in their experience? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, sometimes you need to, and sometimes you don't need to. Sometimes by making that explicit could scare that person back out, right?
Yeah.
And it depends what intellectual level they're at, what stage they're at making peace with their body. And, again, that's another gift of art therapy, that it doesn't have to be words, that the simple act and the healing act of making, knitting, painting, sculpting, building, you're working with a creative pulse, you're working with the rhythm of the body in a new way. So you're having this relationship that has nothing to do with the abuse or the alienation, but it wakes up a kind of fresh way of experiencing self and other. And doesn't need to be spoken to. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Mm-hmm. Because I think what I'm looking for more is normalization, a way of inhabiting that stance, not a frozen stance, not a flight or a flight stance, but a stance of being in the body that just slowly starts to be, oh, okay, I'm living here now.
Mm-hmm. I have this vivid memory, and I've talked to you about it before, but when we were in embodied life training, and I don't remember what we were doing, some kind of process, and you said something about privileging language. And I had never heard that before, and I thought, what is she talking about? And it was so moving to me, just like opening a whole different doorway I hadn't thought about. And I wonder if you would say a little bit about privileging language, and then what it might be like to privilege non-linguistic experience.
Yeah. Okay. So the language of my work is the language of art making, movement, dramatic play. And sometimes, like when you're in the flow and you're working with someone and they're making an amazing image that could be something that happened to them in the past, or it could be something about resolving a lot of pain, or it could be showing what their anger is. When, I bring in some words and they're open-ended questions, sort of, I'm curious about, or I'm wondering if, even if it's open-ended, those words can constrain or contain even, or silence what that creative expression is, because that creative expression can get so big and it can be so meaningful. And, words can either expand or they can contract that creative pulse that's happening. So I'm always really cautious about, is this adding on or is this misinterpreting? Because, what you're doing in paint and what's happening visually with your hands, is it a misinterpretation to what words, what are the words? What are the right words? Am I stopping this process, or is it time now to make meaning? And it's important sometimes to make meaning, but it's important to not let it stop the beauty that's unfolding. And I think in my work, poetry is the best fit, because poetry can live alongside that kind of expression without shutting it down. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, and I was just, I always think of kind of words other it, they take it to this other place, and the creative expression sometimes is kind of fragile, and can it stand up to words? We have such a bias towards words, whereas poetic language, it's fluid, metaphors, it's more imaginative, and it flows easier with, and it doesn't cover up the silence. It can embody the silence, whereas sometimes words, they don't want to share space with silence.
Yeah. Would you, is this a good time to maybe read one of your wonderful poems?
Oh, sure. I can, yeah. Which one do you want me to read, or what should I?
We're talking about silence, and the one that you, I can't remember the name now, but which one were you talking about?
Okay. So, so this is about going up to a reserve in northern BC, and it's called As Long as It Takes. I was on a reserve in northern BC one Saturday night. Most of the men and some of the women had been drinking from a bowl that had aspirin and alcohol, and I don't remember what else mixed in. My friend, a white teacher hired by the band, said it induced a 2 or 3 day crazy drunk. It was warm that night as we walked around, watching parents getting high and children playing with sticks. And over in a corner, there was a group of men sitting in a circle. They were from a neighboring dry reserve, some quietly talking, some stirring the campfire. I asked, "What are you doing?" And a man said, "Waiting for the others to join us." "How long will you wait?" I said. Stirring the fire, he said, "As long as it takes."
That's beautiful.
Yeah, so this was a really, a lot of addiction and a lot of pain in this community. And this group of men would come every Saturday night and set up a healing circle and just wait. And I think, as for me being there, it's almost like a tourist, that wasn't a place for me. It was their ground, and Indigenous people experience that all the time. That people come from the outside with their ideas of what healing should look like, and they know what they're doing. They know exactly what they need and what they're doing, and they know it'll take as long as it takes, and they will show up every Saturday night until those other men can sit with them. Yeah, so it just taught me about silence, and it taught me about holding space and what that really means in really troubled, chaotic times. It's a huge, huge commitment to hold space.
Yeah, say more about how that is for you, how that translates for you now. Like, what does it mean to hold space in that kind of way?
Well, it's sacred, and it's so much bigger than I. And I can call on, my ancestors, and I can call on whatever help I have. But the more traumatized the children are that I work with, and the more fear that they have, then the bigger space and the more sacred my sense of it has to be for them to be able to be here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and holding space is probably one of the most important things I think a therapist can do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because of that, the creative process can come into the room. The creative energy can come into the room. The spiritual healing energy can come into the room if I can hold the space.
Mm-hmm.
But that also means that, I have to do my work. I have to be resourced. I have to be present and connected and embodied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that I'm just struck again by that phrase, as long as it takes, and how important that is for a healing process, and how in our sort of speedy, I'm thinking of an insurance company interacting with a therapist, for example,
Yeah, 4 sessions in and out.
Nobody wants to, how hard it is for the speedy mind that's common in our culture to resonate with as long as it takes,
Yeah. Well, and even like art therapy, it's not a fast process. Working with the creative energy, like, we don't know when things are going to move. We don't know when things are going to shift. We don't know when there's a small step that's going to happen. And it's not going to be what the ministry wants, and this contract isn't going to be done in 6 months. You can't be traumatized from birth most of your life and then all of a sudden decide, okay, you're in therapy, it's going to take 8 sessions and then you're done.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah, so it kind of goes against some of the modern ways of working.
Mm-hmm.
And in Indigenous culture here, the belief is it took 7 generations for white men to destroy and do the genocide and the work that they have done to take apart the world, and it will take Indigenous culture 7 generations to heal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's amazing. This is such a smaller scale version of what you're talking about, but I'm remembering. A few years ago, I was working with a client in a Feldenkrais context, and he came in and he had real muscular imbalance in his 2 legs, traumatic, but he had a habit. He was a trail runner of favoring one leg that had developed a lot more muscularly than the other one. And he said, it's taken me 20 years to get like this. So I'm totally okay if the work that we do takes me at least 10 years to get over this.
Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it?
I wish more people came in with that. We're always looking for the quick fix, and both the humility and the honesty of the time healing takes.
Yeah,
resonating with what you're saying.
Well, there's this other poem. It's called Sharp Edges, and it's working with he was little at the time, and one of the horrendous stories I've ever heard, his mother was a heroin addict and would lock him in cupboards for long periods of time, and he lived in a group home when he came to see me, and everyone in the group home, he was the least liked child. He was angry, and he was really quite hostile to everyone, and dangerous. And when he first started coming here, he was dangerous too. And a lot of the work was just sitting with him. And like you would a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old, because he never had that attachment. He never had that chance of someone just holding him in positive regard, in love, and just being with him.
Wow.
And that's, through doing that, and through him making, and through him, kind of making his way out of it by creating, his trauma got resolved.
Wow.
And it was very much just holding space, just seeing him as this amazing creative person who was slowly unfolding all of the terror and the trauma that was done to him. And I could read the poem if you want.
Oh, I'd love it. Please.
Okay, it's called Sharp Edges. The hope I didn't know that I was waiting for just walked through the door in the shape of a teenage boy. Angry, lost, shut down, hard-edged as a scalpel, procking open a wound, And I kept thinking how making art travels the path of least resistance, how it cuts through steel and stone. When no one's looking, probing into a teenage boy's business, it can blast through years of emptiness, mistrust, breaking open the body above the rubble. Raw feelings emerge, and sharp edges turn into wanting hot chocolate and checking the cupboards for new art supplies. And I saw out from under the toughness a small, innocent boy, excited at the attention and loving the chance to play.
Oh, that makes me weepy.
Yeah, it was like watching him melt, watching him, come back. And I call it like slipping in, like side embodiment. You know, when you're talking to a teenager and they'll open up when you're traveling in a car because you're both looking forward and the motion of the car allows them to talk. It's almost the same thing. You know, you're sitting here and you're doing art with someone and, it's like side embodiment that they just kind of slip into the body because they're happy, they're relaxed, they're creating, they're safe to come back, but it's through that side door because it's too scary to say, okay, where do you feel that in your body? And
right.
But this way, you're feeling it in the body because you just made something amazing and your chest puffs up and your stomach settles and you feel energy in your legs because, you just took something and made something out of nothing. And it's like, wow, I can do this. I'm an inventor.
Mm-hmm.
So you can come home.
Wow. It's so profound. What I'm noticing as I'm hearing you talk about it is something about like, I feel it in my body. I'm going to see if I can articulate it. It's almost like even in healing work, this sort of forward press of trying to get somewhere and the courage or the really different space you have to pop into or slide into of doing art therapy or play or just trusting something about not trying. It's like the playful factor.
Yeah, and it is trusting the process. Like Sean McNeff, who's, my mentor and the art therapist that I love learning from, he talks, he wrote this amazing book called Trusting the Process. And, and, if I want something to happen or if I plan for something to happen, that gets in the way of what the creative process is going to do in this room. Right. And, he talks about like, we're all in the river, like just trust where it's going. And when I can be held by that space, be held by my own presence and trusting that what will emerge, what will need to emerge will emerge. That's great. That's when magic does happen. Mm-hmm. But it's hard when, as I said, I've got a contract and, there's these objectives and this behavior is supposed to change and it's supposed to change in 2 weeks. Right. But yeah, you can walk in that world too.
It's amazing. So I'm thinking right now about imagining someone listening to this who may or may not have a relationship with their own creative process. A lot of adults don't so much, mm-hmm. Make time for that kind of spacious, trusting the process kind of activity. So what is some kind of, whether we do it now or it's an invitation for later, what's some kind of an invitation you could make for someone who's a little curious? I'm actually asking this for myself as well as the listeners. Like, it feels a little scary in a busy life to make time for that. Not scary exactly, but like.
Yeah. And I don't think it's making time. It's more reframing or seeing it different. So
that's helpful.
So if the client that just was here this morning, she doesn't do art, but when we are talking about, what's going on in her life, then I might just take a minute and say, okay, so, where do you feel that in your body? Where do you feel what you just said in your body? And mm-hmm. She might say, I feel it in my chest. And I might say, is there a color there? And she'll take a minute and she'll say, yeah, it's red. And is there a feeling under that color? And, she might say, yeah, there's a bit of shame. There's a bit of fear. And then I could suggest, if you were to draw that right now, what would that look like? And she might say, well, it might look pointy. It might look chaotic. And I might say, well, could you show me? And she might draw something that looked like that fear that she just had. And, then I might say, okay, so if you were to ask it, is there anything that it needs right now? She'd say, yeah, like I was alone then. I needed someone with me. I needed someone who could protect me. Mm-hmm. And then I might say, okay, well, if you drew that on the paper, what would that look like? And she might draw someone around that, holding her, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of an easy way to, I hope, is that an easy way to kind of understand how, because we're always thinking in images. Mm-hmm. And if you were to talk to me about something traumatic that had happened, you would have a really strong image of it. Mm-hmm. And if we brought that image back to the body, then we would see where you're holding the stress, the strain of the trauma image, where the residue is in the body, where the effects are in the body. Mm-hmm. And sometimes by drawing that, sometimes by expressing it through clay, you can release some of the feelings. You can make sense of some of the images related to the bigger part of your life. Like there's so many different ways of doing it, but it's just calling it in as you would use your hands to work with someone on your table, right? Yeah. So it's using the gift of our visual and all the senses.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a way of releasing because you're expressing it on paper. It's a way of sensing deeper sometimes because, we're working with the image and it's like having a third person in the room. So that's the client, me, and this art that's happening. Mm. The art has its own presence. So sometimes it can teach, it can inform us in a different way. Yeah. Does that demystify it or mystify it more?
It's beautiful because I feel very familiar with the process of what you're talking about, both with myself and people I work with, up to the point of taking the time to express it visually. Yeah. I'm either, movement or privileging language. And I think it's really fascinating to think of how, and you actually make it sound simple, like, oh yeah, I the pointy red anger in the chest, like. Yeah.
Well, okay. What if I read this poem, Teenagers, because it kind of explains it, I think, simply.
Yeah. Great. I love your poetry so much.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Okay. Teenagers. Dipping into forest green, she paints scented fruits, which she tells me live in hotels downtown. And now she paints the sky blue and adds swirling colors of birds that vanish. And she tells me how she hates her stepmother. And some clouds vanish, now repainted, an orangey yellow sun, which turns into an orange yellow sun in a pale sky. And she hates her boyfriend and thinks he's really depressed. She's adding mist above the tree boughs and dipping her brush into the white, then mixing it with gray. And her best friend is pregnant, and her father will kill her. And she thinks she'll add a young beech tree on the edge of the forest, but she's not sure about the color. And she wonders about creating some red deer high up on the mountain. And she dips her brush into the mix of yellow and green and brown for the pine trees. And she got so wasted last Friday. She didn't mean to, but her friends showed up with all this alcohol and they went to the beach and the moon was so bright. Mm-hmm. And now flowers appear and she tells me she's skipping class and she may fail 2 subjects and she sleeps in class when she does show up. And she's painting rain, blue, gray, and then she stops for a while and we have tea. And she thanks me for not giving her advice like everybody else. And she tells me I'm the only one who just listens. and I bite down hard on my therapist's tongue.
Oh, God. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, so it's simple.
It is simple, but it's like, as they say, simple, not easy, maybe sometimes. I feel the sideways move you're talking about in that poem so clearly,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the more you experience it, the more you can embody, right? The more you can find a way home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something about in my own what do I want to say, edgy relationship with not identifying as a visual artist with doing something like that. But
yeah, but if if you are a professional artist or a visual artist, that can constrain this process, because this process is all about process. It's not about product.
yeah,
Visual artists, they want something beautiful, or they want something that they perceive as, this is what art looks like. But the children I work with and the adults I work with, they're not artists, so they can allow the creative process to work through them.
right.
Yeah, they don't direct it, they don't expect anything from it.
Uh-huh.
And they know that it's gonna be, I mean, they come with a goal, they come with a problem, they come with something that they want to resolve, and the creative process will mold itself around that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, it's exciting. I feel nervous, excited, imagining doing some of that myself.
Yeah, it's an interesting process. It can be a really interesting process. And, and poetry, like for me, is such a huge part of it, because poetry is, it's so visual, it's so close to the bone.
Do you mean, reading poems, or you writing poems, or the whole realm?
Yeah, having clients write poems, like lots of times if someone does a painting, then if the client's comfortable, then I might suggest that they write a poem response to it, a poetic response to it. Yeah, because prose or poetry, it's for me, it's so close to just that visual image. Like, it can stay so close to the colors and the lines and the shapes. They just take the form of words.
So how do you write in a way that stays, I'm so curious, ever since your comment years ago about privileging language and how language can be a connector or more of a disconnector, right? It can be coming from embodied experience, or take us spinning out into realms that are not bad, but maybe pretty disconnected from embodied what's happening. And how do you invite someone to make a poetic response? How do you do that?
Okay, so for example, the poem I just read, I might, because she might not know anything about poetry, I might tell her that it's really poetic, and I might point out a couple of things in it. If I was to write it, I mean, there's lots of different ways you could do it, but I might say, for me, the deer on the hill, like there's 3 images here that I see as a poem. And then I might, send her home with a Mary Oliver's poems, or, poems that have something to do with her age that she can relate to. Because, teenagers are so into music, and the lines are poetic, or they're into hip hop, or they're into, and, something that has spoken word, they get poetry.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then maybe me doing a quick poetic response, saying, making up a 2-line poem about what she just did, just to give her that invitation. That this could be what a poem could look like. Or what you did was so, that was just so poetic. So it's just, inviting the language, I guess.
Imagining the way that poetry was presented to me when I was a teenager, and how you're speaking to it, like, what a great therapist you are, Karen. Really find a way that you get how a teenager could relate to it, really different than dissecting classical.
Well, it also has to be dramatic, right?
It has to be what?
Well, it has to be dramatic, because if you're a teenager, everything has to be a little bit dramatic. And poetry, dark poetry, is really dramatic.
That's true.
Yeah, so it's got that appeal.
Mm-hmm. Great. I love this. Would you be, oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I was just going to suggest to you, because you love poetry so much.
I do.
And because you're thinking maybe about getting a little bit more into visual art, just do a response to a poem that just moves you. Mm-hmm. Do a quick art response. Just to play. That sounds scary exciting.
The other thing just to say is, I love poetry. I read poetry all the time. I relish poetry. And I don't write poetry. I write, but I feel nervous about whatever it means to write poetry, and I love, you're just making all of this so playful and like, I don't know.
Yeah. What else could it be? What else could it be? And I think too, that whole idea of being in the creative process, like just held by the nurture, the mother of the creative process. What else do? We spontaneously play.
Yeah.
And it's because it's too big. Healing trauma is too big, but I can show up and I can play, and I can deeply hold space, and I can teach children and I can teach adults really interesting, creative ways of seeing themselves differently and letting their bodies breathe differently through calling in, that creative energy.
It's cool. I want to play with you. I guess we're getting a little bit of that right now, but
yeah, we are.
It's great. I was going to ask if you would be willing to read that beautiful Prayer Flags poem.
Oh, okay. Prayer Flags. I hope I can find it. Oh, I think I... 90. Yes, I can. Okay. So this was in a group that I run. Mm-hmm. Which group is this? So it's a women's group called Soul Garden. Okay, so prayer flags. Mm-hmm. We are making prayer flags to hang in the gardens, sorting through the rag bag, finding bits and pieces of materials, making stamps, painting, sewing on buttons, fringe, printing words, adding threads. And we're talking about spring, the time of hope, new beginnings, when seeds are planted. And one woman saw some cloth that reminded her of a blouse she wore as a little girl. And we sat around the art table, drinking tea, sewing, laughing. She begins to talk about her childhood. Most days, she said, Father met me at the screen door with a leather belt or a Bible, while his hand reached under my blouse, and he said he liked his daughters clean. He said I was coated with lies and sins and lazy habits, and God knows what all else. After, fixing me like a mannequin, tucking in my blouse, fluffing my hair, adjusting my barrettes, he reminded me that my life was hell, in case for 1 minute I might think otherwise. And we all stopped talking, but we kept on sewing, because that's what we're here for, to change rags into flags that pray. Ugh. Yeah, and that just reminds me, that's what we've always done. Women have always been makers. We've always, we started by making cordage. We started by making thread. And we made baskets, and we made vessels to hold water and food. And in colonial times, women, the only time they got together and talked about their traumas was around the kitchen table when they had sewing bees. It was the only safe place to talk about the fact that their husband was beating them or whatever was happening. And we've always, women, we've always made it better. We've always made, if a child was hurt, we would make a coat. We would make something to make it better, to heal. And making and healing are hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
through making we heal, through healing we make.
Mm. It feels just important to, I don't know what I want to say, just the seems to be darkening times in the world, hard energy to be with, and something about coming together and making, seems so grounded and profoundly healing,
Yeah. And sometimes it is simple, right? Like, we know that to get through a really traumatic, chaotic time, it's doing those simple little things,
Mm-hmm.
and keeping faith that, we can make our way out of here. We are making our way out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just how profound, making cordage was, that you could take reeds of grass and put 3 together and make it strong enough that it was a piece of rope.
Yeah.
Like, how, who would have thought of that?
Right.
But that rope saved us. That rope got us to the next stage of development.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a poem here called Makeover, and I'm trying to find it. But it's just, it's just the idea of, is it that simple that, can we make it over? Can we fix things by making? And I know we can.
Yeah.
Like, myself, when I was a teenager, I went through a period where I was really addicted, and I came home and I was lost. I didn't connect with my family, and I was totally disconnected with myself. And I was in pretty high-end trauma. I was pretty frozen. And I started making candles, and I have no idea why. And, my mother must have ordered it for me, the wax. She would have had to. And in my mind, and I think I write a poem about it, it's in this book, but in my mind, I thought I was making like hundreds of candles, but I just kept making these candles. And then finally, at the end, I left, and I went to Calgary, and I kept on with my life. But that's happened to me 2 or 3 times in my life, that when I've been lost, just desperately depressed and lost and traumatized, I've started making, that I've just made things.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not beautiful things, and they're not necessarily artistic things, but the creative process, I don't know why, it comes to me and
Mm-hmm.
Helps me through by making things, and it's healing, and I wouldn't trust in it if it wasn't personal, if I didn't know that it heals.
The way I relate to that is cooking. I think I start cooking like crazy when I'm in that space also.
Yeah, and so the cooking spirits, they hold you.
Right, I feel that.
Yeah, and something gets healed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's that trust in, and you trust again. You trust in yourself again. You trust in the world again. You trust in your senses.
Yeah, that's really profound.
And simple.
I just want to say I was excited for our conversation, and the depth, like the simplicity and the depth is moving me more than I expected. Like, it's really beautiful and profound and simple and what we need,
Yeah, and I think it just, the world gets so big and it gets so complex, and it seems like there's no way out. But how else have we ever gotten out of anything except by making?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I found a makeover. Did you?
No, what page is it?
57.
57, great. Okay. Yeah, so, okay, a makeover.
Mm-hmm.
I'm cleaning the work table where children have been making Christmas angels and painting on small cards. And I think of the decades of people making things and children creating something new for the first time. And suddenly I notice it feels too lonely in this room, where I alone struggle with how to make things better, different, or just to make things. The making of things that my mother, grandmother, aunts, and sisters all did, making to make of, to make as if, to make anew. Now in my art therapy studio, a boy just left and I wonder, what does he make of coming here for art therapy? Mm-hmm. His past 13 years are full of sadness and loss and sorrow. Will he make it? We sewed a magic bag to wrap around to help him calm down when stressed. He made a friendship bracelet for his girlfriend. He likes to make things. He's good at it. Fast, smart, wise fingers. He looks through the cabinets of the sewing machine given by a friend and finds her mother's ribbons and bobbins and threads, the leftover bits of making things. And I want to make it better, or at least or okay. I want to help him cut and sew and add rice for the bag. This making together, will it make a difference? And when we play darts and one lands on the floor, Joe says, hey, that's a makeover. And it'd be as simple as that. Are we making over the years when no one watched and marveled at his making? Are we making over the years when life was violent and unpredictable? Are we making over the years when he was alone and hurt and hungry? Are we making over? Are we making over?
I love it. I'm just all grounded. Like, as you keep bringing up connection with ancestors too, you know, it almost seems like in some ways, in certain parts of modern culture, you can sort of not have to make things. You know what I mean? You can order everything on Amazon.com and get takeout and, you know, things. Yeah. And how simple, like how beautiful the need to make things and and how healing and simple it is. I'm just so touched by that.
Yeah. But, you know, we do make up ourselves every day. We make up the selves that we're going to be, and we make up how we're going to get through the day. And we make up, you know, what we're going to text or what we're going to say. And it's all a creative act. Yeah. You know, it's all being a creative act of being. And I think, you know, sometimes when I'm really deep in meditation and I have that sense of just, you know, being held in silence and just so quiet, then I get to feel like just, I don't know, for me, I get to feel that creative pulse all around me.
Yeah.
And I'm, you know, and it's like, oh, you know, I get to play too. I get to be Karen. I get to decide how she's going to do this.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we're makers, whether we're, you know, making with our hands or making on the computer or, yeah.
I love that perspective.
Yeah.
It's sort of, I said this earlier, but there's something about like a hierarchy of art, and that's how many of us might not identify with being someone who can do that. And the way you're just grounding the fact that we're doing that all the time. I love it.
Yeah, no, we're creating who we are constantly, right? Unless we're stuck in historical self. If we're present, each moment we speak is like a new creation, right? It's a new way of showing up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is so inspiring. It's beautiful. Do you want to say anything more about an invitation for people, or anything about your work? Anything else you want to kind of throw in the pot of this particular conversation we're making? Okay, so no, I'm not quite sure. No, I'm thinking, I don't know. I'm not, I find that confusing. Just that if you haven't tried art therapy, I would invite anyone to, because it's, you know, it's definitely not about having creative talent. It's about, diving into the creative process and just the process. And is it something that might open up things for you in a new way? And would that be exciting? And what would it be like to get out of, you know, the thinking brain and into more of the embodied self and express from there? And would it be something that would help you move through an obstacle or move through a stuck place? Because sometimes it is a different perspective or a different look
that helps us move ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And and if it isn't something you've tried, and if you had a skilled art therapist to work with, that might be exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might open up a whole new, talent, a whole new way of seeing, a whole way of being at peace with yourself.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. I'm so grateful we got to talk today, Karen.
Yeah, it's been nice. Yeah.
And thank you for sharing your poetry. I just want to mention your book is called There Is No Need to Talk About This, Poetic Inquiry from the Art Therapy Studio. And I love this book.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's close to my heart.
Yeah, that's clear. It comes through the page.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your work and for just personally, like how I feel grounded in a kind of understanding of embodied creativity in myself in a very accessible way that I'm super grateful for.
Thank you. Okay, can I just play with you a bit?
Yes.
Okay, so if there was an image of that, what would the image be?
Of this grounded feeling I'm talking about?
Yeah. What image comes to you?
Actually, the image I have just when you ask that is just like my hands meeting right now. They're on the table or the ground. It's like, that's it. Just I'm placing my hands on the table or the ground. It feels it's like being in contact.
Yeah. So that might be fun to take a photo of that or to do a quick sketch of that.
See, you're so fun. I could do that.
Yeah, and that's all it is. That's all it is.
Oh, I love the playfulness. It feels so healing.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you. We'll talk soon.
Okay.
Okay. Bye, Karen.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. You can help support this podcast by leaving a review on iTunes, making a donation at bodyhappy.com, or by sharing it with your friends. We appreciate your support.